pull out breaker things. I'm not gonna mess with that.
Burn more calories in school. Larry said that was the guy went to school with and started eating about 50.
All right, in essence, knowing we have a lot to discuss tonight and get through, we'll go ahead and get started with the work session. Al, roll call.
Benson.
Here.
Brunig.
Here.
Maibaum.
Present.
Minor.
Here.
Schramm.
Here.
Weber.
Here.
Mayor Moser.
Here.
City Manager Leon.
Here.
City Attorney Denherter.
Here.
All right. According to our agenda, even in the work session, is there anybody in the public that wants to address the commission on something not on the work session agenda? All right, with that, I will turn it over to City Manager Leon to go through our 2022-2025 strategic planning.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the commission and public. There are some copies of this in the back of the room if people don't want to look at it on a screen. We have a watermark draft on there because tonight this is a draft, and hoping to get some conversation going and see what we may need to tweak before we publish this and before I bring it back to the commission for your consideration. So what the strategic plan is really is more or less a compass. So that's the way I look at the plan to work, and that's what I'd like everyone to understand, that it's not intended to be a report or exactly an explanation on how everything's going to go, but rather something that we can hold and use to help us sort of navigate our journey. So using this as part of our everyday operations, as well as when we have discussions at the commission level about longer range things, to help us know if we're going in the right direction. Now, that certainly doesn't mean there aren't things that will change over the course of the years. When we did this plan, what I call the purple plan, I wish that we would have known there was going to be a pandemic, because there would have been a lot of other things written down here. So we can't predict the future, but this will help us do something about the future. The only thing you can really do about the future is plan, because we certainly can't control it. So the point of this document, as you know, is to be used more or less like a board game. And so those were some of the cues that I gave our facilitator, which is why it's only the one-page menu style type document. So tonight, what I wanted to do is talk with you and the public about how to interpret this, because it is a different format than we've previously had. And then talk about any major changes or things where you think that were not explained or not reflected in our day's work, 2 days' work that we had with our facilitator. So with that, I'll have you start on the side that says the 2022 to 2025 strategic plan and outlines our mission, values, and trends, as well as our priorities. We put 2022 to 2025 there, knowing that this has to be something long-term, and many of these things may not even be accomplished in that time frame, but having that broader time frame for us to work on these things, knowing that many of the projects and things will take more than 1 or 2 years to complete. What I'm thinking is we'll probably touch back sometime between that time frame and update, just like we did with the previous strategic plan, but wanted to put a long enough date on here so that we can actually have some accomplishments that we're able to tick off and move forward with the rest of the work. Our mission, as you all know, is to provide exemplary experiences, services, and spaces that create opportunities for everyone to learn, engage, and thrive. And we talked about that a little bit at our session. We did talk a little bit about the word together, but as I recall, when we got into the values and talked about collaboration as still being one of our values, that was sort of implied in our values. So we didn't talk about changing our mission statement. We felt that it was a relevant statement still today, and that we're all working always towards living that mission. So happy to talk about that further if you'd like to, but making changes to that is a process in itself. We did make some alterations to our values, and that doesn't mean that some of our values have gone away, but what we value sometimes is a reflection of what's happening in our world. And so we changed a few things that we didn't have previously. We talked a lot about civic engagement and involving people and being inclusive with people as something that we value and we want to have as a focus for us. We reworded some things. So instead of things like seamlessness and sustainability, we talked about livability and all the things that could mean. We talked about being future focused as in terms of how we do our business and how we make decisions. So before we were using the word seamlessness, I think the two are implied the same, but future focus kind of takes into account technology, takes into account being visionary, takes into account some of the things that we hadn't previously. And we still maintain some of the values that we talked about before in terms of transparency, always trying to be transparent with what we do. And we added leadership and integrity as well for us, in this day where we hear so many things across the country about people that don't value leadership in the way the Yankton community does and haven't performed with integrity. We all talked about how important that is for folks to understand that is something that we value and won't compromise on when we're making decisions. So certainly if you have a comment or have something you want to interrupt or don't recall talking about, I can certainly go back to that. The trends that drive our decisions, they've changed as well. Some will always stay the same. Infrastructure, for example, was something that we've always wanted to, that we always need to focus on. It's ever aging and ever needing maintenance and attention. But some of the things, again, have changed based on what's changed in our world. So human capital is something that is a whole new focus for us. Not that we didn't pay attention to our human capital previous, but as you all know, we've experienced a mini resignation, just like the country experienced the Great Resignation. We've changed our wage rate. We've are working on retention. We've added employee engagement to something that's going to be part of our operational procedures that really wasn't a focus before. So we need to respond to the labor market, and certainly human capital is one of those as well. Managing expectations also is one of the trends that we talked about. Especially, I think, in the first couple of years here, managing expectations of each other and expectations of the community is going to be something that we will want to work on and be challenged with. The world isn't the same as it used to be, and we're all just kind of coming back now from the unexpected, and it's going to take a while to get our footing, and we have things that were left on the front and back burner prior to the pandemic, and we have new things that are coming towards us. And so just being able to continue to communicate and manage everybody's expectations, I think, will be important, from an operational and departmental level to a commission level to a community level as well. So certainly we're all experiencing that as well. Technology, I will talk about that a little bit, because we know that using technology in regards to how we operate is not just smart for us for doing business, but it's also smart for our human capital, meaning we probably won't have the advantage of having, we hope to, but folks that are with us 30 or 40 years going forward. So we need to use technology to try to capture some of the institutional knowledge and be a little bit more able to revolve or evolve when we have new employees. But also the newer employee expects that we have the technology. And technology can help keep our information safe. It can also help keep our information unsafe. So we're using these terms in a real broad type way, because they can be interpreted a little bit differently. But definitely technology is something that we're looking at even more and more to help us do our business of governing and implementing your guys' priorities and implementing strategies here in our plan. The priorities are not set forth in a list like we did last time, but rather in a wheel, and that was intentional as well, so that they didn't look like one was a larger priority than the other. That's one of the, I guess, critiques that was made from our last strategic plan, that perhaps those priorities when listed look like they were prioritized priorities when they were all our priorities. So we talked about putting them in a wheel so folks understood that they all work together consistently. So human capital, infrastructure, housing, connectivity, quality of life, community development in the downtown, being resilient and proactive. So not exactly the same words we were using before, sort of a reinvented type language, a little bit easier language to interpret, a little less specific as well. And I think that is important too, being as we still don't really know all the impacts of the last couple of years, but we know those things are going to be priority areas that we're needing to focus and talk about and talk together about. I'm going to take a drink of water here and ask you all if you have comments or things to talk about on that first page that I didn't cover or didn't explain well. Okay, good. I wanted to give you a chance and the public a chance to hear about some of the trends that are driving our decisions, and immediately in the next 1 to 2 years that that we're working on. And I won't talk about all these things because we don't have time, but I hope that as I talk about a few of them, you'll connect the dots here on the board game a little bit and maybe flip back and forth between the various sides of the document. So when you think about, for example, about a quarter of the way down is police department e-tickets. You all are going to talk about that tonight and act on that tonight. So when we talk about that, we're using various parts of it's an example of how we're using various parts of the plan. So not only is it about efficiency and being seamless or being using technology, but it's also about our human capital. So it's about what makes the operations for our employees that have to issue tickets, what's convenient for them. How can that work on a broader scale in the future with the county and with the state to make that process easier for the actual citizen? So it isn't an obstacle for somebody that maybe doesn't know where the county courthouse is, or doesn't have a way to come in physically and pay for a ticket. So while these things are important in the immediate, it's not just about that task at hand. They should all fit in some way to that circle of priorities and reflect back on those trends and values. If we can't say that about each of those things, then we're missing something. So that's kind of been my litmus test as new things come up to me and to our staff is, can I fit them into that matrix on the board game? Do they belong in the game of life? I don't know if anyone played the game of life, but or kept spinning until they got the profession they wanted or the number of kids. But if they don't fit in there, it's hard for me to say we should be working on them. And you can see then what priorities are reflected there. So when we talk about e-tickets, we talk about human capital and we talk about other priorities too. And there's some that check more boxes than others. I did add, just to be transparent, like we said we were going to be, I did add fire chief hire. At the time when we sat around the tables working together, we had a fire chief, and then we didn't. Tom Kurtenbach retired, so when I was working with our consultant, I said, well, we have the human resource and employee engagement hire on there. Another big hire for us is going to be the fire chief hire. So I did add that because I figured that was something we could all agree on should be in that process. One of the things that I thought you might want to talk about is our active transportation plan, and that's about halfway down. And the reason why I thought we would like to talk about it is because we spent a lot of time talking about access and how people navigate in the community and the crosswalks people use and signage and those types of things. So we didn't list all the things that we're going to be working on. For example, tonight I'm going to give you an update on some school signals, which is something we've been working on for a long time. And we have some speed signal signs that we're working on. And we have sidewalk plans that we're working on, trail projects that we're working on. As we went back with the consultant and talked with each other as a staff, we felt like, the active transportation plan can really help us answer a lot of those questions, and we really need to look at an update to that in the next year to 2 years to make some of those adjustments. So we encompass some of those things into that, and you can see, that involves infrastructure, quality life, community development, and being, resilient and proactive for our community. So you might not see all the things that you mentioned here, but we tried to fold them into a manageable list. Another one that I wanted to explain a little bit for the public's benefit is communication and telling our story. So one of the things that we talked about, and I can't remember if we talked about it at the commission level or if we talked about it just with staff, is making sure people understand who we are and what we're doing and seeing our big picture. And as governments go, we don't always do a great job of telling our story and helping people understand our story. And I think in order for people to be engaged, they need to understand. And so we've tried to do more of that, and we will look to do more of that into the future. So I try to tell you a little bit of our story every week when I talk about living our mission, but we need to do more of that in the public. So when the fire department helps out the police department and saves a kitten in a PVC pipe, we need to tell our story there a little bit. It's not always about the big things we do, but it's about some of the smaller things we do too. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Also, we left emergencies and public health / preparedness in there, and this was back in October, and I remember saying to Dwayne, like, I'm not sure we need to put that in there. We're COVID's, we're coming to the end there, but you're talking with the staff, and they're always smarter than I am. They're like, no, we might have another wave, we might have another thing to think about. So I think we're never going to be done with what could happen in terms of emergency or public health, and keeping that as part of our strategic plan and in the back of our mind that, hey, we could have a flood, even though we already had one. We could have a pandemic, even though we're still in one. We could have, a tornado, even though we hope we never experience that. But keeping those things in the back of our mind, that can really change everything and really just reset our priorities. So that's another thing that I wanted to talk about and explain to you. One of the things that I really want to change is, you'll see almost down to the end of the page, we have something that says Team Dream Time. And that really isn't worded very well. I'd like to change that to Team Planning Time a little, or some other kind of vernacular. What is meant there is, one of the things that we talked about as a staff is we rarely have time to talk together about the things that we're working on, things that we should be working on, brainstorm and create ideas. Sometimes we just feel like we're putting out fires or working towards the next deadline or putting together the next packet, and we're not having those big conversations that we need to have, not just with each other, but also with you. So I'd like to reword that. I don't want the community to think that we want time to sit and daydream and doodle on a page, but we want some time to have some good, heavy conversations. Some of you have heard me say the last couple of years, with the pandemic, we're building the plane as we fly it. I've said that a number of times. That's something I stole from Brad Bees. He told me that, and I was like, that's good. That's what we're doing. So where I want to be is that we are able to aviate. We're able to fly that plane while we're communicating to everyone else where we're flying, but then also be able to navigate at the same time and move, talk about where we want to go in the future. And so to me, that's what that is that team planning time. And team might mean community members. Team might mean you as a commission. Team might mean us as a staff. But to have that time. We also put as a priority, and something we really need to think about, is recharging and connecting with our family and our community. That's partially personal, meaning a lot of us, and everyone in our community has been through a lot these last couple of years. No matter who you are, no matter how you were impacted, we've all been through a lot. And so giving ourselves the space to take earned time, but also to, think about, what ways can we bring the community back together when it's safe or safer to do so? What ways can we, reconnect and make sure that placemaking and those engagement opportunities exist, and so that we have some of that time too. I think that's been important in the last couple of years where so many things have got canceled or changed. When we feel comfortable, let's start doing some of those things, and perhaps I know Parks is working with a lot of different entities who are planning summer events, and hopefully those things can happen, but what things can we bring to the community to reconnect them as well? So that's something that I thought was really valuable to make sure that we focused on and talked a little bit about. So I didn't even mention things like, the wastewater plant, and you know how big that project is. Bless you. Some of the smaller projects, perhaps, like rewiring City Hall. But I'm happy to talk about those things, and also to hear from you your questions about, where does something stand that's on this list? Have we started it? Have we not started it? Or why isn't this on the list? Because it could be something we talked about and I missed, or it could be something that is incorporated somewhere.
Are you taking questions?
I'm taking questions, comments,
I would like to ask a question, please.
tomatoes. Yes, ma'am.
No tomatoes for you. My question is about West Side Park, and I see that it has 2 shades of blue dots, right, for quality of life and connectivity. In my brain, West Side Park is also part of our infrastructure because it is, correct me, Mr. Mingo, is it not the last retention pond as the city drains, as the water is pouring out of our city if we have a heavy rain or a flood? Those fancy words. Yes, it is. So would it be, in your opinion, does it deserve a little orange sherbet dot, or?
It does reserve a dot. So yeah, I mean, those are things too that if missed, it's good to bring up and talk about, because I've been looking at this for a couple of months now, and the staff has given me some feedback as well, but it's useful to have that kind of feedback as well, because that is part of our infrastructure. It's part of our social infrastructure too, certainly.
Thank you.
As I've been thinking about this process too, we are going to have to talk about recycling.
Yes, well, recycling is a service, but we will long-term probably have to continue to visit about recycling with joint powers, and so maybe that's something that would go into the longer term.
Okay, that makes sense.
Longer term.
Amy brought up a question about West Side Park, and relevant question, and Mr. Mingo provided an answer for us. If I were to hand off this document to somebody from the public and have them look at West Side Park, for instance, would it be useful not only for us but for them to understand who are we tying that particular project, trend, whatever you want to call it, to within our administration. So if we were to just go outside of the color-codedness of human capital, infrastructure, housing, but to also basically, whether it's a city commissioner or if it's a member of the public, when we put this out there, if there's a question about West Side Park, here are the members of the administration, whether it's department head or departments in general, that are going to provide answers or essentially be accountable to the process.
Yeah, we can definitely add that. You know, there's probably always a lead department head or team as I look down the list of these things. And there's, you know, I'm ultimately accountable for them. But certainly if that's valuable for the public, we can put the department director who would be leading the project associated with that. So if there are questions, people can direct them. If the commission feels like that's useful as well to do. We did have that before, and it got to be a lot on the page. This is a little cleaner of a format, so we certainly can do that. There's probably room for another column for responsibility.
Just from my perspective, I kind of like the clean format, but I can understand where Commissioner Maibaum's coming from. Is it possible to do an addendum or something that, a lot of these are going to cross over.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily need that bottom wheel on the corner because you can flip back and forth. So, I mean, I can talk to them about designing something that would give a, you know, would give a way to make a sort of an accountability, or maybe not an accountability column, but, you know, a lead person. Because obviously, you know, if some things, you know, some things are going to be out of our control. If we aren't able to secure a contractor at a reasonable, you know, rate for the wastewater treatment plant, even though Kyle's the lead, that, you know, that's a little bit out of his control. So maybe not call it accountability, but just contact or team leader, or think about that language a little bit. That maybe champion is the right word there. Other questions or comments about the immediate trends or status of something that you haven't heard about for a while that you'd like to know about?
Looking at some of these that are on this page, I'm like, that's great if we can do this in 1 to 2 years and knock that off the list. So obviously knowing that this is a work in progress, do you see eventually they would move to the other side? They just continue to be on this side and that 1 to 2 years just keeps being 1 to 2 years, not necessarily from a start date? Or how do you see that flowing as we move forward?
So we know that, you know, we talked about this, was it October? So 5 months have passed, and we have some progress on many of these things, but a lot of these things are multi-year. So, you know, maybe in an update, some of these things Tetris off the list, and we're able to add some more, but I think some will still be there. By that time, maybe some of the longer term projects are broken down enough that we can put some steps or some parts, pieces of the longer term project into those immediate type trends. So, you know, I expect, for example, our human resources and employee engagement hire doesn't need to stay on the list, maybe even today. That's something we can move off the list because folks know that I hired Brittany Orr to serve in that role. But the wastewater plant decision and plans is going to turn into, we hope, a wastewater plant project, and then that will take a number of years as well. So exactly. It's going to keep moving and hopefully be malleable as the years move ahead. Just so we're giving enough time to talk about the longer term items, I'll move on, but that certainly doesn't exclude us from talking more about the shorter term strategies for us. So if you want to go back to them, we can, but some of the longer term items we talked about also tie into the priorities that we agreed upon. One of them being the library master plan and program. We know that the library's been talked about for a number of years as something that the community is interested in focusing on, and that building is, I think, a circa 1977, and it's aged. Dana and her team do a great job of making that space relevant and using that space the best they can. Ultimately, though, the community may want something different. The library of today is not the library of yesteryear, which is why their tagline is Beyond Books, I think it is, because that's just a small part of the services that libraries provide communities. So, I think that where we start there, and I've talked with the Library Foundation and Friends of the Library, is the place to start there is probably putting together a master plan and feasibility study and understanding what does the community want? Does the community want something different? Where would that happen? What does that look like? What types of things should be in that space? And so, 2 to 5 years there probably isn't the right even time frame. It's probably longer than that before something substantially changes, but with that facility. But I think in the next 2 to 5 years, we should start really planning that. Of course, if something changes and we have some benevolent donor, that could move that into the 1 to 2 year term project. So that's a possibility as well. But that is something that we talked about a bit. Developing recreation partnerships, something that we always continue to talk about. And we know from our current project with Westside Park, those partnerships, when those come together, tend to move things from the dream stage to the let's move forward and execute stage. So tomorrow, as a matter of fact, we're going to be talking with a sports group. Todd and I are going to be talking with a sports group and seeing what, what their needs and dreams are versus what we think can happen in our community. And sometimes those conversations are, yep, that can happen. It's going to happen in the long term over time as it's a budget priority. But if there's other things that can come forward, other partnerships or sponsorships, it can be maybe in the short term. So we're still continuing to work on that. We talked last year about Meridian Bridge funding and future planning and just what are we going to do with that wonderful asset we have in our community. That's a monster. I mean, that is a monster from the standpoint of its physical size, its history, its meaning in our community, but also whatever we're going to do. But we have to start talking about that and thinking about that. I think where we landed is that we need to identify what the funding source is going to be to preserve that in our community. And nobody knows that right now, but putting it on this plan sets an expectation for me that over the course of the next few years, we're going to start talking about that, identifying what that could be, and seeing if there's interest in the community to make that kind of a funding source happen. So that's definitely something that I think the community will like to hear that we're going to begin talking about. But to talk about these things, or the other three things we talked about, we do need some of that planning time that we'll have to set aside and make priorities for. We had the wastewater treatment plant. I think that should say plant and not plan on our long term as well. So that's something we'll be working on for the for different for a number of years. also expanding, not just developing recreation partnerships, but expanding recreation options. Some of that's happening outside of us. For example, soccer, everyone knows about the exciting things soccer is doing, but we'll definitely be part of that facility because it'll be part of our community. And, you know, we don't know what the next recreational trends will be, and we'll be partnering with those as well. So how can we expand those in our community? Adding sidewalk and trail mileage we talked about, and improving the pedestrian crosses. One of the things we look at now, and that was a result of strategic planning, is whenever we do a street project, we look at it making a complete street. So adding the sidewalks, thinking about crosswalks, thinking about how it connects within the community. That's within sort of our way of thinking now, but we talked a lot in the community focus groups, talked a lot about how can we add to that, how can we bolster that in our community. Proactively use and identify new revenue sources. So, of course, all these things cost money, and we have sort of a shot in the arm when it comes to stimulus money right now. Much of those dollars are one-time money, and we also have are benefiting right now from favorable sales tax revenue. How can we continue to grow that? Where can we identify new revenue sources? What's available to us? Like it or don't like it, marijuana could be a revenue source for communities, and we need to, think about that. Is that a way where we can expand some of the recreation options, or help us build partnerships with some of the revenue that might come from a legally recognized recreational marijuana? I know that's not happening right now, but it might be good to have some conversation about that prior to when it's discussed for us at a state level. Succession planning and leadership development, I think we all learned and have continued to learn the value of that. And that's just not about us in City Hall and our people that we have working with us on our team. It's also about in the community. Who are the leaders of the future? Will you all sit in these chairs forever? Probably not. So how do we get people engaged? How do we get people interested? How do we make sure they understand that it's so much more than coming to a commission meeting? It's so much more than, you don't have to be intimidated if you don't have budget experience. How do we get that leadership and in engagement? And of course, also within our own organization. Important that we're looking into the future and looking at people that can serve in different capacities, and let people try things and give people opportunities within our own organization. Cybersecurity and technology, as we said, is going to continue to be an issue for us and for all organizations, and we know that we have a great IT team, but we keep adding technology and technology and technology and technology, and it impacts every aspect of our work. I mean, just in every way. And so we know that, we need to continue to work towards being as secure as possible, and to make sure we have the tools we need and the people we need to keep our technology relevant and to keep us secure. Housing plans and partnerships are just going to be critical. Everyone enjoyed the announcement we heard from Manitou about, their expansion and development, and we're excited about that. I don't know where the people are going to come from, but they're going to come from somewhere, and they have to live places. That makes, that makes it a challenge for our community as a whole. So that doesn't necessarily mean we'll be underway with a housing development, but it might mean, working with Yankton Thrive and some of the property that we own currently, or it might mean working with, folks on lots that are have homes that are dilapidated that need to be removed, and maybe there's a governor's home or something else. It'll be a lot of discussions from Dave's office and community development about where are the places where there's already infrastructure, where there's already services provided, where we don't have to necessarily expend a lot of dollars to be able to expand the housing stock. So getting creative in those ways as well. And we just know that much of what's encompassed in that is going to be moved into the immediate trends because it's already an issue. I don't know how many houses there are on the market, but I don't think very many. And that's an issue now, and we don't have that influx of people yet. So we need to be ready for that as well. So while exciting, along with housing development will come more retail, commercial, service development too. So that's exciting. That's also more to consider and think about and make sure we're growing in the right way as well. So that's something that's going to be happening in the next 2 to 5 years that we'll be adjusting to. Are there long-term projects that you remember we talked about and you all feel should be included here or are not sort of explained well enough, need more dots? I don't know on this column if we are ready to put a champion on here yet. You know, when I think about the recipe for the aquatic center, I think the champion was really Dive in Yankton. So I hate yet to put, you know, I need to think about that a little more, but those things might still be in the kind of the clouds forming there yet.
I would agree with that, first of all, because just like the bridge funding, that's, okay. Just like the bridge funding, that could be something completely outside of what we might be doing. The other thing is that the succession planning and the leadership, I understand it because you might have a more defined program in, you know, that we can focus on in 2 years.
We may.
But should it really go over here as well? Because it's not being forgotten.
Yes, it probably is a short and long term, and it's probably something we're never going to be done with.
I think that's ongoing, and as much as hopefully we have a greater master plan to better develop internally in 2 years down the road, I think it's something that we're still going to be focusing on today, 3 days from now.
Yes. Also, I will mention that Yankton Thrive has this on their radar as well. On a community perspective, you know, they're probably not thinking about, well, who can run this aspect of the city organization when that person retires, but they're looking on a community basis about leadership development in our community. In the past, that was a function of the chamber. They had a leadership Yankton group, so they're looking at reinventing that a little bit and looking for community leadership in ways. So we will need partners in that as well. But yeah, I can definitely get behind moving, or I guess mirroring that in the short-term plan as well. And I would expect, as I reflected on this, and I've already gone through some edits with the facilitator, I would expect that when we do our update, that longer term, what I call vision list or the long-term vision, that list probably gets a little bit longer. And I don't think our immediate list will ever get shorter, but I think we have to give ourselves a little bit of understanding that, you know, we just came off of a whirlwind sort of roller coaster here for the last couple of years, and I'm not sure we were all in a good place to really get everything down and be able to think as broadly as we might be able to a year from now. So I think this is a really good place that we've started, and you guys have given me some good suggestions to make this document stronger. You will have an opportunity to accept this. One thing I got asked is why don't we have the picture of the commissioners on there? It has nothing to do with not liking how you guys look or anything like that, but you know, one of the things I realized with this document, this format, is as soon as April rolled around, a lot of times there was new faces. And so we want to get this out in the community as much as possible and want it to be usable. So we'll try to do a better job about getting your faces on the website. And as your faces change, it's easier to change that than to change all of the faces on the actual document. So that was, unless you feel strongly about that, we can all put you in, there's room here, we can put 8x10s, we can attach 8x10s too if you'd like, headshots. What else do I need to know or hear from you about? One of the things that I'd like to suggest to you is if you see on our short list, which has been on our short list a long time, but about midway down is the 1929 water plant. I think we're ready to come back and start having some longer, meaningful conversation with the commission about that. So I'm hoping that's what we're talking about in March. I'll give a little more detail about what's happened the last year or so in that project and some of your options, and you can give us some direction where you want to take that project.
Amy, I am curious, in looking at these lists are long, and none of these tasks are just a very big take one day, check it off and be done. So as you've worked with the department heads, with us, back with the city staff, are you feeling this list is pretty balanced, that it's doable? Where are your concerns? Do we have the staffing we need to pull some of this off? Is it too exhaustive? You're comfortable? Your staff is comfortable? What are your thoughts there?
I think, Madam Mayor, we are now, our staff, and they can nod their head or shake their head. I can't see them, so you take a look at them. We are now comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's something that I can thank the pandemic for. This is overwhelming, but we've proven that even in the midst of the unexpected, we can get our projects done, and what needs to happen always will. We proved that in the last couple of years. And what doesn't have to happen, what would be nice to happen, we can still work on. And I think this is good in the sense that it also gives us hope for what we're going to move into and what we're going to be. And, you know, I think in some regard that was taken away from some folks in the last couple of years. And so to me, this is a hopeful document, but that's what it should be, you know, a document of expectations. Not everything is going to get done here exactly, and some things that are on here might not get done at all. But I think we have a pretty good track record. You know, when we got this done, I thought, I don't think so, but a lot of these things are near completion. So short term is yes, but we work well in that, I guess, overwhelmed sort of state of knowing we have a lot to do, but knowing we're the right folks to do it. And I think that with continued good leadership from the City Commission and continuing to have these types of discussions, this is a good plan going forward that we can use and add to and change.
Amy, sorry.
Oh, I did have something I wanted to bring up, and I apologize for my tardiness this evening. Enhanced cybersecurity is in the longer term, 2 to 5 years. I wonder if that shouldn't be more of an immediate need, just considering the fact that as many data breaches and things like that there are out there, and systems getting locked up. that maybe that shouldn't be something that should be ongoing and immediate.
Yeah, I wondered, Commissioner Villanueva, if somebody wouldn't suggest that. And maybe on the long-term side, it changes to some other type of technology-focused. I don't want to lose sight of continuing to expand technology in a way it makes sense for us to get our work done. But we are already working, as I alluded to in my last report to you all, on our cybersecurity, knowing that it was something important. We've talked about back this fall. Dwayne and I have had several conversations, and you probably already see some changes when I send you an email now. It's saying, make sure you know this person, and make sure and he's worked on some training for staff to help us identify when things maybe don't look that might look suspect. I've even gotten texts that I don't reply to because I think this is phishing, and we found out that it was somebody really innocent in the community. But I thought, I'm not gonna answer that. I sent out an email and said, does anyone recognize this number? And it was a very nice lady that we work with in the community, but she was texting me. I thought, that's a scam. That's a scam. So yes, agreed. One of the things that Dwayne has told me is, and I think is true, some of the biggest companies in the world have been, we maybe won't be able to protect us against everything, but to focus on at least give an attempt to be the best we can, I think is important right now and long term. So yes, I will make some, I don't know exactly what that will look like, but I can definitely make that change.
So I don't think we should prioritize this list in any way, because I don't think it's actually possible. But what I was going to say is there are definitely some checkoff points of ones that I think are going to easily be done in the next 6 to 9 months that are on here. Is there something where we want to have a highlighted portion towards the top of more of those individual checkoff items where it'd be a quick, easy update so this list doesn't stay looking daunting?
Yes. Yes. I will talk with the, maybe there's a way we can show completion, or that we're at a point where we can, move into assessing the project. So I'll think about that a little bit as well. And, one of the things I think would be beneficial to do is come back and visit with you maybe a year after, which would be next in the fall here. Get this in front of you for consideration once it's edited, and then come back to you in the fall and say, you should have a good idea where we are with all these things, but look at all the things we've accomplished and done, and hopefully done well. You can also ask department heads questions too if you want really hard ones. Or just wait till the regular meeting for that. Well, I appreciate your time and attention, Mayor. I don't know if you want to, if there's anything else, I'm happy to talk about it or take a little break before our regular meeting.
Oh, I would probably definitely suggest a couple-minute break, but I would encourage the commission to take this copy and go back, look at your notes from the meeting, and reflect on that and make sure this does illustrate where we see we want to go, because once we kind of have this printed and we've approved it, we need to stick to it. So it becomes really hard on city staff, knowing that we've given them these priorities and these projects to work on, to then add and continue to request things. So kind of go back to your notes and just reflect and make sure what you're seeing here you're comfortable with, because once approved, then that is going to be the direction we're giving city staff as they move forward. So any last minute comments? I would say, City Manager Leon, this is great. I love the way it looks. I leaned over and grabbed my purple copy out, and it does look very clean and easy to read. So I thank you and staff and others who put time into putting this together for us to look at tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the work session of February 28th.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Anybody abstaining, getting out of the work session? We're not. All right, we will have about a 5-minute recess before we start the regular commission meeting. Thank you.
No offense, Bridget, but I'm gonna move next to. Oh, I see how it is. No, it's not that way. We just might have too much fun. Oh, I know.